For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Financial Mail editor Rob Rose discusses his latest book titled Steinheist, Marcus Jooste, Steinhoff, and SA's biggest corporate fraud. For the benefit of those who might not know Steinhoff, can you briefly tell us about it?
So Steinhoff was one of the largest companies on the JSE. It had been built up over 20 years, listed in 1998, I think it was, and it owned some of the best brands you'll know in this country. It owned the JD Group guys, which was Joshua Dorr, Bradlow's, Price and Pride, all those stores. It also owned companies overseas, which included Conforama, the biggest retail chain in France. And essentially they were one of the biggest retailers in the world. I think they were second in Europe to IKEA, furniture retailers. So they'd built up this massive business. But the point is that a lot of it seems to have been smoke and mirrors. And that's what happened last year, in December 2017, when Steinhoff admitted that there were accounting irregularities and the CEO, Marcus Jooste, resigned with immediate effect, which was quite a surprise.
Why did you decide to write about this saga, and who should be reading this book?
Well, the Steinhoff collapse is one of the biggest corporate scandals in this country's history. The largest collapse of a big company in which half our pension funds, 60% of our pension funds in this country had investments. So it affects a lot of people. I think it's important to understand why this happened, what lay behind it, and what are the lessons we could learn for the rest of society. For example, directors and executives. What can they tell us about? I mean, what does their experience tell us about how the corporate sector operates and what can be improved?
Can you share the impact of the occurrences of 5 December 2017, which saw CEO of Steinhoff, Marcus Jooste, resigned with immediate effect?
Well, Marcus Jooste resigned on that day after a week in which the auditors said we're unwilling to sign off Steinhoff's accounts. There are too many things they're uncomfortable with. They demanded a forensic investigation. And what happened is that the auditors and the executives, the board members met and said that it's impossible to sign the accounts off. And Marcus said to them, well, it's fine, I'm going to go to Germany and get the documents you need so you're comfortable. Went to Germany, came back on the Monday morning, and he just didn't meet them, just never arrived to give them the documents that he said he had. And at that stage they realized that there were some huge problems in those accounts. And then he said to Christo Wiese, who was the chairman at the time, I'll be there at 11 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning, to come and give you all the documents. Just never arrived. And the board then debated what to do and realized that they could only really accept his resignation at that stage and then try and mop up what had happened, mop up the mess and figure out what had happened.
The book also narrates about an important meeting that took place on the 29th of November 2017 between the Deloitte auditors and tycoon Christo Wiese that unveiled that was happening. Can you briefly tell us about that meeting?
Well, in the couple of weeks leading up to that meeting, this is the week before Marcus's resignation. Leading up to it, I think some of the board members had realized that their accounts weren't quite what they thought they were, and Deloitte had huge problems, like I said, at that stage. So about a week before, I think the Wednesday before Marcus's resignation, the Deloitte auditors and the head of the audit committee, Steve Boyson, met Christo Wiese, who was the chairman, and said to him, what one of the auditors said is that, do you know that your management has been defrauding this company for years? And this was a huge shock to Christo. He said, what do you mean? That sounds crazy. And he said to Deloitte, well, you've signed off the financials for the previous years, so how come you guys didn't notice? And that was the thing that tipped the dominoes, I suppose. From then, they called in Marcus and said to them, you must explain where these things are. There's this extra income in the accounts. Where does this all come from? And that led to Marcus going to Germany to fetch the documents, which he never ultimately collected.
Will it be fair to partly blame government for this saga?
I don't think we can blame government for this. I think what you can do is you can say that the Hawks are meant to be investigating the fallout. And you could certainly say that the crime-fighting authorities should have acted sooner. They should have done something by now. It's a year since Steinhoff's collapse. And nobody has been arrested, nobody's been charged. We've had the biggest scandal in this country's corporate history, and the Hawks have done nothing. And I think that's partly because the Hawks don't have the skills anymore to understand corporate crime. And corporate crimes are notoriously hard to prosecute anyway. But especially at this particular juncture for the Hawks, they seem to be sitting on their hands.
And do you think it's fair that Marcus Jooste is a free man?
Marcus is in Hermanus and seems to be living a happy life. And I'm sure he's pretty stressed by all these events, but that is the issue for the Hawks. I mean, surely Steinhoff has already made certain presentations to the police about where they believe culpability lies in this, and they should have acted. The fact that they hasn't speaks so much about holding companies to account in this country and how difficult it is. I mean, these are difficult crimes. These are difficult crimes to prosecute. But for the good of our country's economy and governance, we have to get these things done.
The book is a result of interviews with key role players in our country, Netherlands, UK, as well as Germany. Can you tell us if it was easy for them to trust you with the information?
Well, I mean, I spoke to a lot of people who are involved in this. I spoke to Christo Wiese quite a lot. I spoke to a lot of the executives or the directors from Steinhoff. And then I also spent a lot of time, like I said, in Germany with Bruno Steinhoff, who started this company. And for people like Bruno, there are a lot of things they want to talk about. I mean, this guy started the company in 1965, I think, in Germany. He built it up over decades. He would not see his family for years while building it up. So it becomes this monstrous multi-billion rand global multinational, and then almost overnight it collapses. So for somebody who poured their entire life into building this, it's quite a nasty slap for them. So I think for them, a lot of them wanted to speak about this and what happened. Because like any big corporate scandal, there's 1,000 stories, but not all of them are true. So I think a lot of them wanted to clarify their role in what happened.
Do you think the image of Steinhoff can be salvaged?
I'm not sure about Steinhoff itself. I'm not sure if the Steinhoff name can be salvaged. Already they started last year, before this collapse, they started Steinhoff Africa Retail, which is meant to be the African arm of Steinhoff. And that was essentially mostly PEP. And PEP, one of the first things they did this year was to rebrand themselves as Pepcore, to move away from the Steinhoff name. So the individual brands, there's some good individual brands, some good individual companies inside Steinhoff. But whether the Steinhoff name can survive as the overarching retail brand, I suppose is up for debate at this point.
Can you share how Shoprite was able to escape getting caught in the saga?
Well, so Christo Wiese was the chairman of Shoprite. He essentially controlled the largest shareholder in Shoprite. He was also the largest shareholder in Steinhoff. So what he wanted to do was essentially merge Steinhoff and Shoprite, create an African retail company, the Steinhoff Africa Retail, that included Shoprite. And in exchange for this, Steinhoff Africa would then include Shoprite. It would be the biggest retailer on the continent. And in exchange for this, Christo Wiese himself personally would have got shares in Steinhoff for this. But obviously some of the executives at Shoprite, specifically the former CEO, Whitey Basson, thought it was a terrible idea, resisted this. And when it collapsed, when Steinhoff collapsed last year, Shoprite was already half into this merger, but it wasn't fully done. So in a way, Shoprite just escaped, and Christo Wiese certainly just escaped, because had this merger been completed, Christo would have got Steinhoff shares in return, and he would be essentially bankrupt at this point. So it was a massive reprieve for Christo, and I think a big reprieve for Shoprite. But it proves that throughout the years, Shoprite's been a fantastic company. It's done really well. It's boosted its revenues. It's run according to very strict discipline. And Steinhoff was something else entirely, which is why people like Whitey Basson resisted this from the beginning.
And lastly, what else will the readers get from this book?
Understanding a story like this is important to understanding our corporate environment. We understand how companies operate. We have this veneer of how things operate on the JSE. We see this fantastic stock exchange in Sandton, and we think the companies all run fantastically well and have no issues. But if you look beneath the hood, you see disputes at board level. You have company executives who dispute that transactions should take place. I think for me, it was an intriguing insight into what happens beneath the hood of a company like this. And then, there's obviously the fact that there's a major scandal involved, which I believe is, it's South Africa's Enron. So getting to grips with what happened so it doesn't happen again, I think is critical to understanding our society.
That was Rob Rose speaking to Polity about his book titled Steinheist, Marcus Jooste, Steinhoff, and SA's Biggest Corporate Fraud.